All right, welcome back to the Blitz Banter podcast. Today, we're going to go through our running back and wide receiver rankings heading into week 8 of the fantasy football season.
All right. Let's move on to our wide receiver rankings. So, same thing for wide receiver rankings. We're going to go 1 through 15, and we're just going to talk about some players that, are a surprise or, we differ a lot on type thing. So, yeah, let's get right into it. So 1 through 15 for me. Number 1, I got Jamar Chase. Number 2 is Justin Jefferson. Number 3, AJ Brown. Number 4, Amon-Ra St. Brown. Number 5, I'm actually going to go Drake London. Number 6 is going to be Malik Neighbors for me. Number 7 is CD Lamb. Number 8, Tyreek Hill. Number 9, Stephon Diggs. 10, Garrett Wilson. 11, Devontae Adams. Both Jets receivers. I think they fit nicely there. Number 12 is going to be Cooper Kupp for me. 13, Zay Flowers. 14, Brian Thomas Jr. And 15, I got Terry McLaurin to round it out. All right.
Hunter, if you want, you can take it. All right, I don't mind
All
as
right,
well.
yeah, I'll go from here. All right, number one, we're gonna go with Justin Jefferson. Number two, Amon-Ra St. Brown. Number three, Jamar Chase. Number four, AJ Brown. Number five, CeeDee Lamb. Number six, Tyreek Hill. Number seven, Drake London. Number eight, Devontae Adams. Number nine, Garrett Wilson. Number 10, Malik Neighbors. Number 11, Cooper Kupp. Number 12, DJ Moore. Number 13, Zay Flowers. Number 14, Stephon Diggs. And rounding out the list is number 15, Amari Cooper.
Okay.
For me, my list is number 1, Jamar Chase, like Mark. 2, Amon-Ra St. Brown. 3, Justin Jefferson. 4, I have AJ Brown. 5, I got Malik Neighbors. 6, I have Drake London. Yes, I did move him up. 7, CeeDee Lamb. 8, Devontae Adams. 9, Garrett Wilson. Also have those Jets back to back. 10 is Cooper Kupp, now that we know he will be playing on Thursday night. 11 is Tyreek Hill. 12, Deebo Samuel. I do have George Pickens in my top 15. I don't love it, but I got him at 13. Giants secondary sucks, so got to throw him in there. And he's been playing all right. 14, Zay Flowers. I think he'll bounce back. And rounding out the list at 15 is Stephon Diggs.
All right. Kind of an interesting move here. I kind of want to talk about CeeDee Lamb and just the Cowboys in general. Um, to me, like, just I don't know. I watched the Cowboys play, and I can't really see, you know, there's still so much football to be played with this, with every team in the NFL. And, CeeDee Lamb is a really, really, really good wide receiver. Like you could argue he's top three as a skilled player. But to me, it just looks like there's so much wrong with the Cowboys offense that, for fantasy value, it's not able to be supported for CeeDee Lamb. He's not necessarily done really bad in fantasy football, but when we're talking about fantasy production, you drafted him as like the number 2 overall pick, and you're expecting him to average, 20 plus points in fantasy, but he's really on par with guys like Drake London and like Drake London's a third round pick, and it's great that he's the wide receiver 3 overall in PPR leagues through the first 7 weeks, but he was a third round pick. CeeDee Lamb was potentially the first overall pick in your league. So just curious as your guys' thoughts. I mean, we all have him in the top 10. Hunter has him at 5 and me and Adam both have him at 7. But like I'm just kind of curious because to me, I'm kind of getting worried, if I'm a CeeDee Lamb owner, I'm a little worried actually. Like I think things could potentially go wrong and CeeDee Lamb might, I don't want to say be a league loser, but not be the league winner that you were hoping for, per se.
Yeah. I mean, I every episode I've said some wonderful stuff about the Cowboys, been very respectful towards them and their owner. But I for this week, just for this week's purposes, I do have them at five. That's just slightly higher than you guys. My note for it was no momentum on either side between the Cowboys and Niners, but
Yeah.
injuries don't favor San Francisco. So I think CD could still perform well this week. Um, it's really comes down to the injuries in San Fran that are the reason for that. But just back to the main thing about CD in general. Obviously, he's still having a good season, but he's not been up to par. He's supposed to be a number one or number two overall pick, number one or number two overall receiver. And right now, what is he like 10, 9, somewhere in that area? So it's not bad. Like he's still a wide receiver one, like in
Yeah.
fantasy, but he's a lower end wide receiver one, which is not where he should be. And that's really not on him. That's on a bunch of people in the organization, including a 80 something year old. But yeah, like I do feel bad because he just signed this big deal and Dak just signed another big deal and they're kind of stuck there at the moment. And I do feel for them, but I think for this week, just this week only, I'm confident that CD could get at least 17 points in fantasy and is a starter for sure.
Okay.
Two things. One, I do not feel bad for them. I'm perfectly okay with them struggling. And two,
Oh,
the
you're
reason,
an NFC East guy. I got it.
even if I wasn't, it's the Dallas Cowboys. I mean, they're well hated among not just NFC East or the National Football League, but all of sports, right? Like that 80 something year old. If I need to see another tweet about how he thought it was a good idea that he passed on Derrick Henry and he doesn't regret
Yeah.
that decision. I mean, come on. Really? This is who's running your franchise? And you signed Dak Prescott, making him one of the most highest paying quarterbacks. I think the reason I'm not high on CD is actually not because of CD, it's because Dak is his quarterback. Like, I think honestly, I've never been a Dak fan, but you look at what happened 2 weeks ago because they just came off the bye this past week. They lost 47-9. They took out all of the starters with like maybe 7, 8 minutes left in the game. This was the game Aiden Hutchinson obviously got hurt, but his numbers are just down. And this is a guy that got drafted in some leagues first, but he was also the number one receiver off of the board in a lot of leagues. And he only has 2 touchdowns this year. One of them comes against the Giants, which is not shocking, right? Like, I know my team is bad. The other one comes in a blowout in week 2 to the New Orleans Saints. Like, Dak Prescott does not have weapons around him. And again, I like, sure, you feel bad for them, but like they're just a laughing stock, right? Like they're a laughing stock because they have an owner that doesn't care about winning. Like, sure, you can feel bad for Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb, but at the same time, it's like their owner doesn't want to spend money and he doesn't want to give them resource. Like who's their best running back right now? I don't know. Like
Elliott.
Zeke, I guess, like
Oh.
what year are we in? Like CeeDee Lamb, I'm high on him. I like him a lot, like you said, as a low end wide receiver one. But actually, I'll disagree with you on this, Hunter. I actually think minus, even though the Niners do have injuries, I still like their secondary and just their all around defense a lot.
Mhm.
And I think they're
Still
a
got Fred
better.
Warner.
Yeah, I mean they're a better defense right now than the Cowboys, who are supposed to be a good defense, like I was saying in the running back video. Um, so to that point, I mean, I think he's definitely top 10, but I have him outside the top five because it's like I just can't take the Cowboys. Maybe it's a little bit biased, but I just can't take the Cowboys seriously. 32 receptions this year is not enough. Like he was targeted 14 times in that first game, or sorry, in that last game, and in that first game he was targeted 10 times, and he had seven. He caught 50% of the passes in the last game. Did not have a touchdown. I don't know if they did they score. Maybe they scored. I don't think they scored a touchdown that game. Like the Lions D, I know we're gonna put out our start sits like on Instagram, but I I even with Aiden Hutchinson, I think they are even a better defense than the Cowboys, and offensively they're working and firing on all cylinders, even without Aiden Hutchinson on defense and with some of the injuries they've had, and now the suspension to Jameson Williams. So I just feel like this week the Cowboys going up against the Niners, it's gonna be a tough matchup for them. They really haven't had it great this year. I mean, they're 3-3. They're beating the teams that they're supposed to be beating, and they're losing some questionable games. Like they lost to the Saints. I know this was when Derek Carr was healthy, but I mean, come on, they beat the Ravens, or I'm sorry, they lost to the Ravens, which they should lose to them. They should beat the Giants, but then they beat the Steelers. Like, how do you beat the Steelers when they've been one of the hottest teams in the AFC and maybe the league, and then get blown out by the Lions, who are now climbing up there? Like, they're very hot and cold, the Cowboys. So I just tend to rank a lot of their players a little bit lower. And actually, now that I say it, like, CeeDee Lamb is the only Dallas Cowboy that I'm really ranking, because if we're doing just running back and receivers, like, there's not one running back on the Cowboys roster that I'm ranking top 15 in the league, and I
Top
can't think of
30.
another. Yeah,
Not
exactly.
even top 40.
100%. And there's not even another receiver that I'm ranking right now too, because it's like he is the only part of that offense, and I think Dak is not that good. I'll say it. I don't think he's that good, and I think it doesn't matter because CD's a natural talent, but like, you need a good quarterback throwing you the ball, especially for the money that he's making if you want to win some games. And you also need, like Hunter said, some ownership that's going to commit to that too. But the Cowboys are a freaking mess, and I just, I can't I can't put CD in the top five against the Niners. That's just he's got to be top seven for me.
All right, I'm actually going to go against consensus here, and I think that Dak Prescott's actually a good quarterback. I'm not saying he's a top 10 or whatever, blah blah blah, but I think he's a good quarterback. He was first overall last year in passing touchdowns, and I don't think that's a coincidence. But here's what I will say about my reasoning for being a little not as excited about CeeDee Lamb. When I look at the top five, my top five wide receivers, what do they all have that CeeDee Lamb doesn't have? A true wide receiver two on that team. Jamar Chase, he's got T. Higgins spreading the ball. Justin Jefferson, he's got Jordan Addison, Jalen Naylor, and some other names I'm probably forgetting that are spreading the ball for him. Amon-Ra St. Brown, he's got Jamison Williams, he's got Sam Laporta on the field. I mean, he's not really a receiver, but like he's got Jahmyr Gibbs that's also spreading the ball. Like these other offenses are finding ways to integrate players into the receiving game. What do the Dallas Cowboys do? They got Jalen Tolbert or Brandon Cooks. Like, okay, but like they're not nearly as good as some of the other names I just mentioned that are on the other offenses. Even the Giants, they got Wan'Dale Robinson and Darius Slayton. I'm a little more excited about them than what the Cowboys have to offer for wide receiver two value. So like I mean, like, it's just a disaster. I mean, even the Giants running backs, I think, are better than the Dallas Cowboys running backs. So it's like to me, when you're a defense, like all you need to do is look at CeeDee Lamb. There's no
Double
other
team,
skill. There's
double
no
team,
other.
not
There's
throwing to
no other
anybody
skill
else.
player on that field that plays on the Cowboys. So I mean, like, yeah, it's funny to laugh at the Cowboys, but at the same time, it's like these players just get thrown in such a bad situation because you have Jerry Jones that doesn't want to sign a freaking running back, and now he's got another opportunity to potentially sign a guy like Travis Etienne. This is a whole nother conversation, but it's like if have the cow had the Cowboys actually established a run game, I think you'd see Dak Prescott be way more efficient in the passing game because he's not throwing the ball as much. That's kind of the key with some of these quarterbacks, like Jared Goff playing so well because he's not throwing the ball 80 times a game,
But
you
Jared,
know?
Jared Goff also has, Amon-Ra, Jamison Williams, like you said, Sam Laporta. He's got two top 15 running backs. Like Dak Prescott, I know you said you think he's good, but can't win in the playoffs. And I don't blame him. I'm blaming, like, you going back to the ownership. Like, they're in, like you said, they're in shitty situations. Like, can't win in the playoffs. And okay, yeah, he throws for a lot of touchdowns, but like, how many interceptions does he have? Like, they kind of counter each other. And like you said, every defense knows what they're expecting when they go up against the Dallas offense. Because it's like, oh, what's Dak Prescott gonna do? Throw to CeeDee Lamb. Let's double or triple coverage him. Okay, we'll get the occasional Jalen Tolbert 15-yard gain, or Brandon Cooks like does something, or maybe Zeke, gets a few yards. But like, and that's why CD is, a top 10 receiver, is because he's getting all these targets. I mean, he was targeted 14 times in that last game, and they got blown out 47-9. Like, just goes to show you how much they use him. It's just that, like, they're a mess. Like you said, they're a mess. So, I don't blame them for being 3-3 and for, CD's struggles this year. But like, I don't feel bad for them, like, So
Yeah.
I don't know. They're a mess.
All right. Guess that's enough with the Dallas Cowboys talk. I'm sure we could talk about them all day. Um, who's another player I wanted to mention? Um, we could touch on George Pickens, but I think I don't have him ranked in the top 15, but to me, like he's literally just outside the top 15 for me. And I'm not going to put him in the top 15 just yet, just due to conservative just kind of as a conservative pick because I think the Steelers, although their offense, they have been winning games and their offense has been rolling. I think, the quarterback situation there is still a little undefined to me. Like the Steelers were 4-2, and I see that they had no reason to throw in Russell Wilson, but they did. And who knows? Mike Tomlin might be like, okay, we're gonna throw Justin Fields back in the under center. And, I think, people are really excited about Justin Fields. They want him to be the quarterback of the future, all this stuff. But, in terms of the passing game, I don't think George Pickens' fantasy value is as high when Justin Fields is on the field. It's not because Justin Fields is a bad quarterback. It's just because Justin Fields is not as good in the passing game as Russell Wilson is. I mean, if you give Russell Wilson weapons to throw to, like when he went to Denver, he had no one there. He had Cortland Sutton, and that was it. But on the Steelers, he's got George Pickens, he's got Pat Fryermuth. He can get some of his running backs involved in the passing game as well. So there's just a little more to be offered, and a little more to be desired on the Steelers offense. So, but yeah, Adam, if you wanted to expand on the George Pickens top 15 pick.
Yeah, I don't love it. I mean, I'm not similar to Najee Harris. I'm not very high on George Pickens. I just feel like the Steelers are winning games, and I it's more matchup based, and because Pickens has had a pretty good, recently he's done well, and the Steelers have been good. I don't need to keep saying that, but um, I just don't like the Giants secondary, and I just think, Deontay Banks is probably their best corner, but he's kind of struggling right now, having a little bit of a sophomore slump, and they really don't have they do have a great rush defense. I will give them that, even with Kayvon out. But their secondary to me is just not one that is going to win you games, and I think because Pittsburgh, um, like you said, they have weapons, whether it's Freiermuth or Pickens or whoever. I think they will be throwing the ball a little bit more and take advantage of that, weakness. That's really all I have to say about it. But I put them top 15 because I just feel like they're a red hot team. They deserve some credit for that, which is why I credited Najee in my top 15 and I credited Pickens. And as much as I hate to say it, the Giants are one of the worst teams. I won't say the worst team in the league, but they're pretty bad. I mean, they're not far off from the worst team in the league, but they are very, very bad. And I think the Steelers should come in and they should win. And George Pickens and Najee Harris will be a reason why. Also, their defense is tremendous this year. TJ Watt's unbelievable. I mean, probably a top three defensive player. Like I think the only two guys I'd put ahead of him right now are probably Myles Garrett and like Pat Surtain. Maybe I'm missing someone,
Fred
but
Warner, Michael Parsons.
Fred Warner. Okay, yeah, top four. Top, but like their defense is really good. This is a team that like could win, but I agree with you, Mark. Like the quarterback situation to me is still very flaky, and I think Fields is the guy. I don't know why they went with Russ. I know they beat the Jets, but anybody's beating the Jets now, especially, in the last two Tuesdays, the last 2 weeks, they fired their head coach as an overreaction and then trade for Devontae Adams and they still can't win. So hopefully the Steelers keep it going though. It's exciting stuff going on over in Pittsburgh. So I
Mhm.
think Pickens is definitely worthy of a top 15 player. I don't know if he might be a guy that's kind of like either just outside the top 15 or 15, 14, 13. Um, but based off of matchup, he's in your top 15. I don't think consistently he's a top 15 player. I just think this week, it makes sense.
Okay.
I'll touch on very briefly. I watched George Pickens in college at Georgia, and I watched him his rookie year. Things I noticed about him is that he's got crazy good hands, and he's a freak athlete. But that's about it. I don't really notice much about his speed or route running, but last on Sunday night, um he kind of shut me up a little bit. He was spectacular. It was one of the best games I've really ever seen of his. And it's interesting that it was with the quarterback that it was his first time playing with in a regular season game and Russell Wilson. So I don't really know what to expect. I was very confused when Russell Wilson went to the Steelers when they had just traded for Justin Fields. Maybe it may not have even been a month in between those two. So it was very strange, but I'm not going to say that if Justin Fields is out there, that George Pickens would be bad. Obviously, it's kind of trended that way this season where he's kind of been so-so. Meanwhile, the one game Russell Wilson played, he was dominant. So it's just something to keep an eye on, really, the QB situation there. And like that's pretty much all I have to say, honestly. Yeah.
One more thing. I think Arthur Smith was a great hire for offensive coordinator. I think he's done a really good job for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And when Justin Fields was the quarterback, you saw him succeeding a lot. And I think that's because he really fits Arthur Smith's system. And I actually thought the Falcons would pursue Fields before they ended up
Yeah.
signing Kirk Cousins and then drafting Michael Penix, which I still don't get. But I thought Justin Fields was definitely going to end up on the Falcons and Arthur Smith would have been coaching him, but they still ended up together, and I think it worked out. And maybe he'll kind of revive Russ a little bit, but I'm not high on Russ. But regardless, offensively, I think that team is taking a big step. But they were always good defensively, but offensively, when they had Kenny Pickett all those years and a couple of years, but they really were not performing well on offense, and now I will say they are, and I do think that you have to give him credit for some of that. So I think he was a great hire by Mike Tomlin.
All right. There was another player I wanted to talk about. Um, Kind of a similar conversation with CeeDee Lamb that I want to have with Malik Neighbors. To me, I still have Malik Neighbors in my top six, so I still think if you have Malik Neighbors, you're not sitting him. Let's just let's just get that out of the way. But we watched the Giants play against the Eagles, and to me, the Eagles don't have the greatest secondary, but I was pretty surprised to see that. I mean, I guess the Giants are just, yeah, they're just a bad team, but like, I really didn't think that the Giants would score just one field goal against the Eagles. I really thought that they would be able to advance the ball down the field a little bit more, especially because you have Malik Neighbors. But that didn't really seem to be the case. Malik Neighbors was held 4 receptions for 40 yards, and now they're going up against the Steelers. And, to me, like I said, you have to rank Malik Neighbors high because I think he just has such a high ceiling and he's already played against good defenses like the Cleveland Browns and the Minnesota Vikings. But I am a little worried because, game one, Daniel Jones played really bad. And ever since then, he played pretty good football. But then this past game, it was kind of the same. Like Daniel Jones, 99 passing yards. That's really not good at all. Um, I mean, now you're going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers, and you got to go up against TJ Watt, and that guy is a freak compared to the offensive line that the New York Giants have. I'm not saying the New York Giants have a bad offensive line, but I
Well, they
just don't.
do. Yeah, you can say that.
Okay, yeah, they do
They
have a
just
bad
lost
offensive
their
line.
all-pro
They
left
have the
tackle
worst
too, by
offensive
the
line
way.
in the league. Yeah.
All right
Yeah,
then.
they also
Okay,
just
worst
lost their
worst
all-pro left tackle. So.
fair enough. All right. I
Yeah.
don't know as much about offensive and defensive lines, but I never thought they were a good offensive line. I didn't think they were necessarily the worst, but I guess they're the worst. So the worst offensive line in the league. And now they have to go up against TJ Watt. And the Pittsburgh defense is just rolling right now, probably more so than the offense through the past few weeks. I mean, like, do you guys worry for the performance that Malik Neighbors can have this week? Like, do you think it's possible that Malik Neighbors could just drop you a goose egg in
So
fantasy this week?
I'll touch on this. last week, I when I saw it was Eagles at Giants, and Eagles were crappy the last two games that they played. I knew
Yeah,
that they would blow the Giants out of the water
same.
because the Giants were in a rough stretch and Saquon returning was just all the motivation that they needed. And
All the
when you
storylines were there, all of them.
yeah, when you have
Yeah.
all that motivation, it rubs off in your defense as well. And that's why Malik Neighbors didn't do much. You kind of have a similar situation here. Steelers are rolling right now on both sides of the ball. Giants just lost their all pro left tackle. And TJ Watt, I don't know if I can't remember if he lines up on the left side or the right side, or like opposite the left tackle or the right tackle. But either way, the Giants don't have either of those, simply put. So I think that it's very possible that Malik Neighbors could really struggle this week. Steelers secondary is one of the better ones in the league for sure. Now I have him ranked. Where do I have him at?
So he's at 10 for you.
Yeah, I think that's a fair rating. Considering he averages a lot of points in general. It's because he gets all these targets. He's the only receiver on the team, really. I mean, if I asked the average person to name two Giants pass catchers, I don't think they could do it. Like they'd probably only mention Malik Neighbors. It's as simple as that. He's the only guy that they have. And against the Steelers defense that has been smothering wide receivers so far this season for the most part, I could definitely see him having a tough day. But I did rank him in the top 10, thinking that he could definitely do some escapability.
Hmm.
Yeah, I had him at 5. I do agree that he can have a tough day, and I do agree that the Steelers defense is very tough. Don't get me wrong. I do agree with your points on the Eagles and the Cowboys. Those were his last two games. You know, if you remember, Malik Neighbors had to play against the Eagles at home. So, like we said, the storylines were there. It was a 28-3 loss. Saquon Barkley returning back to MetLife, and he had to do it on 2 weeks rest because he was in concussion protocol. Um, Now before he had a concussion, even in that Cowboys loss, he caught 12 passes on 15 targets. He had 115 yards. I know the Cowboys defense isn't necessarily great this year, but they should be, against Cleveland, another defense that should be very good. And for the most part, they are. Um, the Giants won that game, and he had 8 catches and 12 yards, and he had 2 touchdowns in that game. He has 3 on the season. Um, Also had 78 yards in that win. And then the week before that, they lost to the Commanders, had another 10 catches, hundreds or so. My point is, I think if Malik Neighbors is fully healthy, because I do think last week we were still seeing him. This was clearly guys will miss a concussion maybe 1 or 2 weeks, but like I do think this was a little bit more on the serious or the severity of this concussion was a little bit more serious because Brian Dable said he wanted to keep it in-house, and especially after Neighbors went to the Travis Scott concert, there was a lot of rumblings around MetLife Stadium, but because of how loud the concert is and the noise and everything. Maybe that affected him. I know it's a crazy thing to say, but like, it is important you're resting when you do have a concussion and Neighbors wasn't. Um, I did not expect him nor the Giants to do well against the Eagles. As a matter of fact, I'm in a spread pool and I easily took the Eagles. I knew, and I said it last week, I knew Saquon Barkley was going to dominate the Giants. I almost wanted to put him like even higher than where I had him this week, maybe even like 1 or 2 in the rankings just because he had such a good week and he has been a top 2 running back all year. And their secondary, while their secondary isn't that great, I mean, Daniel Jones, like Hunter, you hit the nail on the head. Like they're the worst offensive line. And not only are they the worst offensive line, which I think they're like crazy to say, maybe I'm crazy for saying this. I think their offensive line is better than it was last year, and yet they're still the worst offensive line. So and, you also have Daniel Jones snapping the ball. So it's like, we saw Drew Lock come into the last game. Will he be the quarterback? I think the Giants are going to stick with Daniel Jones at least starting. Will Lock come in, maybe. But even still, like, I don't know how to feel about Malik Neighbors. But the reason I have him high, even against a team like the Steelers, is because he has performed so well. And not only has he been the best rookie, minus Jaden Daniels. I'm talking about rookie position players other than quarterback. Um, I think like Mark said, he can do well against good defenses. We saw him do it against the Vikings in week one. We saw him do it against Dallas. We saw him do it against Cleveland. He had one bad game against Philly. And like I said, he was concussed the last 2 weeks. So I'm interested to see how he does this week against the Steelers. I agree, it's not going to be an easy game. I don't think the Giants will win. As a matter of fact, I do see it potentially being another blowout. But I do think we will get a bigger game out of Malik Neighbors as long as he is fully healthy and fully out of that concussion protocol, like he was last week. But if I'm the Giants, I am concerned that Daniel Jones is still the quarterback and that the offensive line is still the offensive line. So, but I am excited about Malik Neighbors' rest of season. Even though he is on a very poor team, a very bad team, I am still excited about him fantasy wise and against some of these defenses too. I think he's a special player.
Yeah, okay. I think that rounds out that conversation. Um, Kind of just another player that, do I want to talk about Drake London?
I think you do, Mark.
All right.
I don't really
I think
care.
you love Drake London. I don't know if
Well,
you love him, but I think you love him.
I drafted him, man. He's a wide receiver three. No,
Wait,
we
you
don't need to
drafted
talk.
him?
I had
We
no
don't we don't
clue.
need to
I
we
had
don't
no
need to
idea you
talk
had him
about
this year.
we don't need to talk about Drake London.
He's more like a Darnell Mooney guy.
We all have him
I
pretty
have him on my
similarly
bench.
ranked.
Oh,
Um,
before we continue, just before you guys before we finish up here, have you guys made waiver wire things? Like, have you made your claims before you forget?
I
yes, I
I
have.
made one claim.
Okay, all right, that's all. You can continue. I just didn't want you guys to forget about it.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm targeting Ricky Pearsall with Ayuk out.
So
I have Brock Purdy. I don't need Tajay Spears. He's not the best running back on the
you can
Titans,
come
and
down.
he's also injured or coming back from an injury. So
Gotcha.
if I can
All
get
right,
Well,
Ricky, then we'll see.
sure. All right, Mark, go ahead.
um, you know what? I guess the last guy we'll talk about is Tyreek Hill because he's a guy we've
Oh,
left off our list for the past probably like few weeks now.
it's been a minute.
Um, Again, it's the same thing with what we were talking about with Devon Achan in the running back video. Um, Tyreek Hill, like to me, when Tua was under center, and I just have to see one game with Tua under center because I don't want to be too high on Tyreek Hill just yet, but he's still inside my top 10. To me, if we see Tyreek Hill, go out there and get the, 8 catches for 130 receiving yards like he did in game one against the Cardinals, he's gonna be a guy that's gonna be ranked number one for me every single week. Simply put. I think I think he has a higher ceiling than guys like Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, and AJ Brown, who I rank in my top three right now, because that's just simply who Tyreek Hill is as a player. Um, you know, they're going up against the Arizona Cardinals. I do have him ranked at wide receiver eight, so I'm definitely like a little bit lower on him than I think most people might be. That's only just because, it's the first game with this Dolphins offense actually coming back. Um, I really think that Tyreek Hill is in line to have a big game. And, some fantasy managers are probably sitting him for the past few weeks, but I think, now is the time that you can slot him back in in your wide receiver one spot and start him with confidence. And I think he's going to get it. I think he will get it done for you this week. So,
Yeah. I'll start here. Because I have Tyreek Hill in fantasy and I've had him all season. I did an auction draft in my main league and he was the most expensive player. For the right reasons, of course, but obviously it hasn't panned out due to the injury. I've started him pretty much every week except for this past one. Hasn't worked out in my favor, obviously. But when in each of those weeks, I'm in half PPR, so the scoring that I'm about to say just pretend it's your league and it's a couple points higher. I'm in half PPR every week. When Tua was out, he was like getting like a projection, like a weekly projection of like 10.5 or so, maybe 11. And this morning, I see it's at like 16 or 17 or something like that. Like immediately, like skyrocket.
Yeah,
And it's actually feasible now. Obviously, he didn't really get to 10 or 11. That was a nice thing for ESPN to do for the first 4
10 or
weeks or
11.
so.
Yeah,
And now hopefully he can get that 16, 17 and half PPR, which probably equates to like 20, 21 and a full PPR like most normal leagues are. So I do look forward to seeing him this week. Um, Playing the Cardinals, I believe. Right? Yeah,
yeah,
playing
the
the Cardinals.
Cardinals.
This is definitely a defense that you could try and dice up a little bit. They don't really have anyone too special on their unit. Buda Baker's really the only guy in the secondary that would make some noise, most likely. I don't want to jinx myself, of course. But I'm really excited for the whole Dolphins offense. I alluded to it in the last video that since Devon Achan is back, that Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and all these other Dolphin players will all be great, or not necessarily be great, but they'll all really do much better than they have the last 4 weeks, most likely against this Cardinals team, and it'll really be led by Tyreek, and I'm excited to see him if Tua plays.
How much did you spend on Tyreek Hill if he was the most expensive player in the league?
All right, so the budget, it's like fake money. 250 budget, you have 16 roster spots. So do some quick math there. I spent 71 of my 250 on him.
And I
So
don't blame you.
it's
I don't
pretty
I don't
penny.
blame you for that. Like, remember,
Yeah.
Tyreek Hill was voted by the players going into the season the number one player in the league, which call me crazy, like Christian McCaffrey, Justin Jefferson,
Still disagree with
oh,
that.
Patrick Mahomes.
Patrick
Yeah.
Mahomes. Yeah, yeah, I agree. Yeah.
If we're gonna put a running back or a receiver as one, it's gonna be Christian McCaffrey for me
Yeah.
every single
I agree.
time.
I agree.
I don't care about Derrick Henry, about all those guys. Christian McCaffrey, he's the only running back that I think, when he comes back in fantasy will ignite everyone's fantasy teams. People
Going
who
off
have
of
him.
going off of the number one thing though, real quick.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, like I agree with you guys, but clearly he was voted number one for a reason. Um, and he hasn't had that game yet this year. Now you could argue week one was that game for him. But that was one of the two wins they have this year. They played the Jacksonville Jaguars at home. Like, not that impressive. 7 receptions, 12 targets, 130 yards, and his lone touchdown on the air. That's impressive. That's an impressive stat line, but the Dolphins beating the Jags is not an impressive thing to me. So, to your guys' points, and not to sound redundant, if Tua is back, we're finally going to see the Miami Dolphins, the team that some people were picking to win the AFC East and picking to go to the playoffs. And I think this week, if Tua's in, it's going to be a true testament as to what the Dolphins are. Now, maybe it's a little too late because we're 8 weeks in, and they're what, 2-4? I think they already had their bye week.
Yeah, I think they're either
Um,
2-4, they're 2-4. Yeah.
yeah, so 2-4. I mean,
It's not too late for them, I don't
I could
think.
see them winning against the Cardinals. Like you said, Buda Baker's the only person in their secondary that is going to actually make some noise. And the Cardinals in passing defense, they rank 26th, like out of 32, and they've given up 236.9, 237 yards, and 10 touchdowns. That's not great. I mean, again, they're a weird team because they find ways to win some games but don't win others. Like, I like them a lot for fantasy because you got guys like Kyler, Marvin Harrison, obviously Trey McBride, like James Conner could give you really good numbers, but I don't like the Cardinals outside of fantasy. So I think this could be a really good week for the Dolphins. But I will back up my previous point in the running back video, which is I think Tua's return still will benefit HN more because he does the rushing and the receiving. But if you're a Tyreek Hill owner like Hunter, you might be finally getting that true Tyreek Hill week out of him. Because minus that week one win against the Jaguars, like he hasn't had a breakout like really good. I mean, he's coming off a loss to the Colts where he had one reception. I believe it was at the end of the game too on two targets, and it
Yep.
was for 8 yards. He rushed one time for 5. Like that's probably one of the worst games you'll ever see in his professional career out of Tyreek Hill. But either if you're a struggling team, sell high on him right now because there will be teams buying, or if you're a team that's in contention that has been benching Tyreek Hill, like Mark was saying, for the last couple weeks, you should be feeling really good that you have Tyreek Hill because like Tua is coming back, and as long as he can stay healthy, like I actually think their defense isn't terrible, but like Hunter was saying earlier, their offense revolves around Tua. So you could throw anybody in there and they're not going to succeed, even though you have Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Devon Achane. Like, but you throw their guy in, their franchise quarterback in there, and they are just going to be the Miami Dolphins. They're going to be the team that everybody was high on going into this year. And Tyreek Hill will be the player that a lot of people were high on as well. Like, if you drafted him for a reason, right? Like, now we're gonna see that reason this week. So I like him a lot. I had him at 11, and the only reason I had him outside the top 10 is because he has been struggling. But I am fully expecting if Tua plays to put him top 10, maybe even top 5 if he has that breakout game.
Right. I think that rounds out the wide receiver rankings for me. Um, I would really just kind of wanted to talk about some of those star players that I mentioned because I think their implications are pretty heavy going into this week. They're going to be difference makers, I want to say. Well, speaking of Malik Neighbors, I think he could be a difference maker depending on winning or losing for you. CeeDee Lamb, same thing. But Tyreek Hill, I think he'll be a difference maker in terms of winning your league this week. But yeah, that rounds it out for me for wide receiver rankings. Thanks for watching the Blitz Banter podcast. Really hope you enjoyed the episode. Make sure to follow us on Instagram at Blitz Banter Pod. We're making really good graphics. Also follow us on Threads because we're doing a really good job there as well. We're posting graphics and memes, so lots to be had on Instagram. And yeah, thanks so much for watching. Please leave a like on the video and subscribe.